Welcome to the African Photography Safaris podcast, episode 17. Hopefully continuing our new, shorter, focused and less rambly diatribe. Possibly.
Maybe, yeah. We do have a bit of a tendency to kind of bumble on a bit, don't we?
Yeah. There is that.
It is what it is.
So in episode 17, we have a book review, 101 Uses for a Dead Cat. Actually, not that. It's 101 Curious Tales of East African Birds by Colin Beale. Published by Pelagic Publishing. Yeah. We have a Secretary Bird themed wildlife wonder and also a link up with our Wild Insights blog on our website called Framing the Wild.
Yep.
This is about what we think about when we take photographs and also when we edit them, when we edit them down and process them, and that process of the decisions we make.
What we think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Cleel's also going to continue his videography and filmmaking about other ways of changing exposure than the usual shutter speed, aperture sort of thing. We'll probably still be chunting on about it in about 3 hours' time.
Yeah.
Before that, though, Framing the Wild. Yeah.
Yes, so on our Wild Insights blog, we've put up, I think I've mentioned this before, it's kind of a companion to this this podcast. We thought we'd put more content up there, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, go to the website and have a look at the Wild Insights blog. We've put first 2 or 3 in a series of insights called Framing the Wild. Framing the Wild is about explaining how we as wildlife photographers have chosen to take certain photographs, why they've survived the editing cull process, and how we process them, how to emphasize certain themes, what decisions we make. A lot of it's about composition. And was that your stomach there?
It was, yeah.
It's quite interesting. Yeah, there's a little wildlife wonder going on there. A lot of it's about composition and behavior and what we saw in a photograph in the first place. It's a behind the scenes look at intent, technique, and results. Please feel free to visit these blogs. It's something that I think is it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about here.
It is, and to be fair, a lot of it's subjective.
Yes,
especially when it comes down to composition, it's our opinion. So when we present these photographs, if anybody would actually come in and say, "Well, actually, I would have done X, Y, and Z," that's great.
Yeah, it's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
it's
first,
very much a personal thing.
Oh, 100%.
It's worth mentioning that that's some of the things that I really enjoy doing when we're on safari. We'll like sit down with certain clients, either a small group or everybody, or just one person, and people will often say, "Well, how would you process this?" And I always start by saying, this is just my opinion. You don't have to follow this. Everybody is different. And the creative process through it, I think, is quite interesting because people do approach things in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because I think I can actually relate that to a specific photograph. I think when we were there this year, John from Australia, he put up this photograph and I was sitting next to him when he took the photograph. And I remember looking at it thinking, shit, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah.
Which, is that's exactly what you're saying.
I think it's interesting you say that because I think it's always a learning experience for us as well.
Absolutely. There's no rights and wrong.
No, we don't assume we're the finished article.
100%.
We're always learning.
No.
I really, to be honest, if I wasn't continually learning, I'd be bored.
Yeah. We learn a lot of clients and guests as well.
Definitely.
So first up, we've got a photograph that I took of a lioness and a cub or a juvenile in the Mara. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll probably see the photograph. Otherwise, we'll have a link to the Wild Insights blog post that we're talking about anyway. Yeah. But what caught my eye on this was the sort of interaction between the juvenile and the lioness. I could see that the cub's need for attention was starting to annoy the female. And eventually she sort of expressed her dissatisfaction with a very obvious snarl. As I often do, I use the rule of thirds as a guideline to give us negative space in the direction the main subject is looking in. And also, I like how the third lion's back and its tail is kind of providing a bit of natural framing for the two subjects.
Yeah,
I did use a short burst mode on the camera to help capture the best bit of drama in the snarl.
Yes,
as well.
You can pick which one you actually was the best of the whole sequence.
Yeah. Because the style makes the photograph.
Yeah,
I do feel.
Definitely, yeah. I was also going to add that I think that the photo is really well balanced with the two lions' heads, offering two different focal points, balancing each other out. I don't know if you felt that, or it was just a natural thing the way you shot it.
Yeah. I probably didn't think of that. At the
maybe
time.
not.
Yeah.
Just the way that they kind of balance each other out, and the other cub's tail as well is kind of framing the photograph. It's nice.
The whole tail thing, I remember I didn't actually really acknowledge that when I was taking the shot. That was something that I sort of saw in post. And I kind of thought, oh, I like that. I like that sort of frame, and a minor adjustment to the crop to sort of facilitate making that a little bit more obvious. Yeah.
I think that's a good distinction there, because you quite often don't see these things when you're in the moment. A lot of it is intent about how you're taking the photograph, but then there's an aspect of creativity about how you process what you choose, which one you choose. I was like, oh, right. I've just noticed that the framing of that works really best with that tail there.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
That's often what happens.
Well, the thing is, you're working with wild animals in a wild environment, and things are happening so randomly all the time. And you don't, when you're looking through the viewfinder, you don't always see everything, and you do kind of think, oh. When you review your shots afterwards, you do notice a lot more than you noticed at the time, because you've got time to sort of absorb it and reflect a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think
it's not. You don't get you often don't get the chance to plan anything. This is not unlike, say, portrait photography, where you can say, can you sit exactly like this with this pose and
absolutely
think this, whatever. You just take what you get.
So we've also stripped down Khalil's absolutely magnificent backlit lioness shot. I think this was I'm gonna say 2019.
Maybe,
and I know I'm right.
Yeah. Do you?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Because it was the last group safari we did before the shit hit the fan and the world went into meltdown in March.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Into coronavirus. Yeah.
So for me, this is an absolute example of where technical excellence happens. In this case, it's recognizing the opportunity to underexpose quite significantly, and it really sort of, that underexposure creates the drama and the aesthetic. If you just kind of let the camera do its thing, you would have just got an average of everything, and it would have looked shite, to be honest.
Yeah,
but you didn't. And this is where it really.
So it's a good example of where the camera will see one thing and you have to kind of override it.
Absolutely.
So for this shot, it was all about the minimalist graphical approach, rather than having all of the lioness's face lit so that you can see the
camera would have tried to do.
It would have tried to make
average
it nice
the highlight and the shadow, and it would have looked shit.
It would have got a happy medium, which would have been a sad medium. It just wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
So the camera would have tried to brighten the lioness's face, which would have been exactly the wrong thing. You'd see all the detail of the face. Well, you wouldn't see all of the detail because there wasn't enough light, and it would just look shit, basically. So this is the exact opposite of that. It uses a very dark foreground and a background with backlighting through the fur to frame the shape of the head. I was a bit more lucky than you. I think you were in a slightly different position, and just so happened that on that day we were better positioned.
I think we were getting the light on the lioness, and you were almost not
we
quite
were
180 degrees, because we would have been in each other's shot.
Yeah,
but we were fairly opposite.
Yeah. I was a bit more lucky on that day, and the vehicle was positioned sort of where the lioness was above us on the bank, and the sun was just rising directly behind her. I think we repositioned very slightly to make sure she was right in the line of the sun. So because it was early morning, the direction of the light was very, very almost horizontal, and the color of the light was very warm, because I've talked about this before. A lot of the blue light gets scattered, and you get that lovely orangey red light coming straight at you.
Yeah.
So it's directional, and it's a beautiful color. So with the sunlight right behind her head, it was just a case of making sure that the camera's exposure didn't try and compensate for it by dragging the exposure up, which is what it would do naturally.
Yeah.
We've just talked about that.
It's an averaging device. That's what the camera like.
The camera doesn't.
An averaging device.
I mean,
it doesn't know what you're trying to photograph.
I wonder if this could potentially be a good use of AI in the future. in that it will inform.
It is AI already, really.
It probably is, yeah. Maybe it'll inform, like, maybe it'll make this. Well, whether it makes the decision for you or not, at the moment it doesn't make the decision for you because you have to drag the exposure back down again.
Yes.
Maybe in the future it'll say, backlit, right? Well, we need it, the exposure to stay low.
Yeah.
As it is with this shot, I had to make sure I was in manual mode and I had to drag the exposure down with exposure compensation to make sure that it was intentionally darker and that just the barest minimum information came through from the backlighting through the fur, and what you can see is just the outline of the lion. And I did process it a little bit because I still had a touch too much overexposure. Well, it wasn't really overexposure. It was more, it wasn't exactly as I wanted it. So to make it just exactly right, I brought the shadows down slightly more.
Yeah.
And it just created that shape of the head.
Shots, you have to do that.
Yeah.
It's a great shot,
yeah. Actually, we'll talk about this later, but it's quite similar to your male lion, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, which is also an absolutely amazing shot.
Thank you. Oh, we'll talk about that later on.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
I got worked. Anyway, yeah. But this kind of thing is something that we're always looking for with our guests, especially in the mornings. We've mentioned it before, but it works really well with lions, baboons, hyenas, and anything with this like loose fur around the head. It sort of helps.
You've got a really good, effective baboon shot a few episodes
ago.
That was
in Botswana.
Yeah. It's just that fur coming through the backlight. It's beautiful.
Especially because they were high up the tree as well, so we're catching more of the light at the time. It even works with ostriches if you can get sort of close in on their neck and their heads, because they've got those like furry necks, So far in our videography and filmmaking series, Khalil's talked about the mindset and the planning for wildlife filmmaking. He did that in episode 14, and in episode 15 we talked about the basics of shutter speed, aperture and filmmaking, how they're similar to those in still photography.
That was my stomach.
It was your stomach. I thought it was a bloody hippo or something.
Hippo pod in the background.
But how they're used in a different way in stills photography compared to in filmmaking. He also covered frame rates, how they relate to shutter speed, and how slow-mo footage is actually achieved.
Yeah, I was just thinking that episode 16 should probably have had a video segment, but I had a lot on and I couldn't be asked.
Yeah.
So that's why I didn't have one. So here we are.
Yeah. So when we say couldn't be asked, it basically means that we just didn't have time. Could be asked, we just didn't have time.
There was a lot on.
There was a lot on.
To be fair.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, before I go into my video segment, how strange it is to be here in midwinter. We're recording this in mid-December, and it's absolutely pitch black outside.
Yeah. It's like being back in the Mara.
Yeah. But so the contrast there is that normally we go to the Mara in sort of August when we've got loads of sunlight here. And I don't know, in midsummer here, it can be light until 11 even, or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you go at the Mara and it's just like night, 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then you get up in the morning and it's 6 o'clock. Whoop, sun. And I noticed this first when long time ago in the late 80s when I went to Brazil. It's just like, the tropics, have a completely different rhythm of up and down light, and you really notice that when you're in the Mara. It's like more or less within a few minutes, it's about 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. Yeah. And then that's what you get with your light.
Equatorial, isn't it? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Anyway, just thought it was an interesting aside.
Yeah.
Today I'm going to talk about, if I can find my control.
Thunk.
Today I'm going to talk about the other ways of controlling exposure other than the basic shutter speed and aperture, as Alan mentioned earlier on. In terms of changing...
It's video.
It's video.
Video and film.
Yes, I should explain that. Yes,
this is not stills.
No. So, but the reason we're mentioning this is because a lot of it relates to a lot of the things that you as stills photographers will already know about. And I think it's... When I did the transition from stills to video, well, mixed if you like, a lot of the information was the same. And as long as you understood the context of, how some of the things are different, then you can carry over an awful lot of the information from one to the other.
The theory's
if
there,
you understand
the
exposure,
theory's
you'll
there.
broadly understand it. There's just some other things to be aware of.
Yeah.
So in terms of changing the exposure of a shot in video, I've already talked about how shutter speed and aperture... You've fallen asleep. Already in my segment, bloody hell.
Yeah, the filmmaking.
He's like nerd mode on for Khalil, and Alan's just having a little kip in the corner.
Pillow out.
Anyway, so as you'll have noticed, with stills, you also have ISO, which is like a third control.
Sorry.
You should know this because I've dragged you into the filmmaking world, kicking and screaming. Anyway, sometimes ISO, if you're used to... What child. So in stills... We're going a bit off-piste here.
Piss bored.
Anyway, so actually the fact that the filmmaking industry sometimes calls ISO gain is boring. So it's just one of those things that, a bit like them calling aperture iris.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. It's the same thing,
Same principle.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a bit of it's a bit, I think there's a little bit of elitism comes into it, really.
It's historic, I think, because it's just how the two sort of things branched off, and they're both coming back together,
converging,
I think.
aren't they?
Yeah. So ISO is basically, or gain, is basically how much the digital signal gets amplified.
To be fair, gain is a better description of ISO than ISO.
Yeah. It's a bit like...
Yeah, technically.
So if you've got a car stereo and you turn the volume up, right, that's gain.
Yeah.
If you turn it up too much, it starts distorting.
Yeah.
And in visual sense, you probably know this from stills. I know you do. Well, just checking,
Yeah, I think.
You get visual noise.
Yes.
So in a car stereo, you get audio noise because the amplifier starts clipping and it gets distorted. And if you turn up the ISO in your camera, you get more visual noise. So if it's really, really dark and you have to crank the ISO up to some crazy level, you get visual noise, which starts disturbing the image. So it's the same for video, basically. You turn up the brightness until the visual distortion appears. So just like for stills cameras, ISO, or gain, if we're calling it that, is the third exposure control, and after shutter speed and aperture. After this, we're talking ND filters, so the fourth control. I think I held up. Oh, it did help. Yeah, four fingers.
The Simpsons.
I thought it was like,
Cody got four fingers.
The fourth control. If you've ever used a physical filter on a stills camera to cut down fourth, I don't know.
Child.
Yeah. Anyway, if you've ever used a physical filter, shut up, Alan, on a stills camera to cut down the amount of light landing on the camera's sensor, you'll have come across an ND filter. All it does is cut down the amount of light, a bit like a pair of sunglasses. You put sunglasses on to take the light level down to an acceptable level. Traditionally, this is done by, not on sunglasses, but on a camera, is you add a physical filter, an actual bit of coloured glass in front of the camera, or sometimes behind the lens, whatever. It involves a filter holder and can be a bit fiddly and cumbersome. To change the amount of light reduction, you might have to add a second filter or a darker one, or change it. ND filters are graded by the amount of light they stop. Stop is kind of, in terms of the amount of camera stops that if you think about one stop NDs, two stop NDs, four stop, you might have come across these in terms of how the filters are graded. I have to say, this sort of physical filter system doesn't lend itself well to wildlife photography or filmmaking because it's cumbersome and you end up with a great big filter on the front of your lens. A much better system is an electronic ND filter just in front of the sensor. One or two mirrorless cameras have this built in, although not very many at the moment. It's pretty rare, and you usually have to go further up the food chain to a more professional cinema camera like the Sony or the Canon or Blackmagic cinema cameras. And the fairly new, this is interesting actually, just at the moment, the Fujifilm GFX Eterna cinema camera, which has an electronic variable ND filter. Some of these have built-in ND filters that you can switch between 1, 2, or 4 stops, for example, or turn them off. That's really convenient because you can use ND filters without the problem of having a physical thing attached to the front of the camera, in a holder that you'd have to take on and off, and it's a faff, and it gets in the way, and you catch it on things. And anyway, so the best ones, in my opinion, are things like the Sony cinema cameras and the new Fujifilm Eterna, which I think I'm right in saying are the only ones at the moment that have a fully variable, smooth, continuously variable electronic ND filter.
What one of the things I don't understand is what is massively different about electronic ND filters and cinecams and very, very low base ISO.
What you have is with ND, so you've got two different ways of looking at it. So, we talked about gain, turning it up and getting noise if you turn it up too much.
Right.
ND works from the other end. Right. It says, I've got this amount of light and I'm going to cut it down. You never get more noise.
Right.
But you might have too dark an image, potentially.
Okay.
And also you have to be concerned, a bit like we've come across in, say, landscape photography, where you've got a shit filter and it adds a colour. And it's all that sort of thing. So it has to be good quality, especially when you're talking about things like the ones that are on board. We were talking about the like my Sony FX9 and the Sony Verano, the really high-end cinema cameras, things like the new Sony Fujifilm Eterna, GFX Eterna. They have variable ND filters that are based on I don't know what it is actually, but it's based on the sensor right in front of the sensor, and they don't colour the image, they don't distort it, not very much anyway, in an acceptable way. And instead of cranking up the ISO to match what light conditions you want, you're actually taking away from the light, and it doesn't change the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO. It just basically says, right, okay, there's too much light here, well, let's take a bit off. So yeah, with an electronically controllable, adjustable, smoothly variable ND filter, this is fantastic because you can use it as an infinitely variable smooth exposure control for cutting out exactly the amount of light you need, all the way down to 7 stops in both the Sony cameras and the Fujifilm, the latest Fujifilm. Why is this a good thing? Because you can use it as an automatic control. So let me set the context. So if you think about how you use aperture priority, for example, in a stills camera, you set the aperture and the camera automatically changes the shutter speed depending on the available light. So same for shutter priority, like the opposite way round, you fix the shutter speed and the camera changes the aperture to account for the changing light. These are automatic exposure modes where the camera is constantly measuring the exposure levels and adjusting either the aperture or the shutter to correct the exposure. What happens if you want a shutter speed and an aperture that you absolutely know you want to use? You want to fix those two. This is particularly critical in filmmaking. This is kind of where we diverge a little bit from stills. As in stills, you would just say, well, it doesn't matter what the shutter speed is.
Absolutely.
In filmmaking, it matters a lot more, as we explained a lot, 2-3 times ago. So where the shutter speed, there's a really good rule of thumb, is that the shutter speed should be 1 over whatever, twice the frame rate is. So if you're shooting at 25 frames a second, your shutter speed should be roughly 1 over 50. And it's one of these things that, like anything else in filmmaking and stills photography, it's a start. You don't have to use that as this must be what you use forever, but it's a really good starting point. What that often does, though, is that's quite low for a shutter speed. And you can get away with that with filmmaking, whereas you might not be able to get away with that in stills. You wouldn't freeze the moment. It just wouldn't look right. In filmmaking, it just does because of how our eyes are used to seeing frames.
The transition between frames, isn't it?
So it works really well. the corollary of that, if that's the correct word to use, I don't know if it is that you can often have far too much light. So if you're a 50th of a second for wildlife photography is really slow.
Yeah,
you're
not going to get any consistency with a still image.
No, so I don't know. If I'm shooting stills in the Mara, I'm using at least 1,000th of a second most of the time, unless there's no light.
Yeah.
So if you want to fix your shutter speed at a 50th, what that's going to do is it's going to allow so much more light in.
You can get. I mean, I've shot small birds at ridiculously 1/35th of a second. It's not. We're not saying it's not achievable.
No,
all you're doing is just introducing a massive kind of element of error.
Yes, plus probably blur as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which can work, because that might be what you
might be able to hold your lens in your camera, but you're relying on that bird or that subject staying absolutely still for that sort of transition of the shutter speed, which is just random, so it's a consistency issue.
Yes, absolutely. Anyway, so that's where ND filters really shine, because in a situation where, for the most part, you will have slower shutter speeds and fixed shutter speeds in filmmaking, even for wildlife, you'll probably have too much light and you want to drag it down. So with the FX9, I'm so used to, in fact, it's on this two-shot that we're doing here, it's just on auto ND.
Yeah.
So what it's doing is it's got a fixed shutter speed.
Right.
It's got a fixed aperture. It's got a fixed ISO.
And it's
at whatever its optimum, for its lowest noise is. And then it's using the ND control to control the variability.
Yeah.
So we were talking about, the fact that it's really dark in here. When we turned up in here first, it was really light.
It was really light,
and it's just, but the image.
So now it's eased off on that electronic ND.
It's completely changed,
yeah.
but we haven't noticed because it's been adjusting all the time.
No. I leant forward and took a filter out and put another one in, or span it around, or some shit like that.
Well, that's what you would have to do. And that's a lot. That's a lot of the reason I haven't changed my system from Sony. Is because that's so convenient.
Absolutely,
it's incredibly convenient. Even so, I've got a mate who shoots Canon, and the quality is beautiful, absolutely amazing quality. But
it doesn't have that.
You've either got to you switch it between 1, 2, 4, 8 stops, whatever. They're discrete. It's a massive jump.
It's massive,
you can't use it as an automatic control like we do for auto ISO.
So there's no automatic incrementation.
Grading. Yeah. So like we were talking about earlier with the new Fujifilm.
The
Eterna cinema camera.
Yeah. I've got to get one of those in your hands.
I'm gonna have to have a little look at that. So what that means is, because the jumps from one ND to another are so discrete, so
it's not
small.
A stop. It's,
no.
It's
They're
very
tiny. You the human eye can't tell.
No.
Which is the same with the Sony
And it's
FX9
happening
and the
automatically,
Sony Grano and whatever the higher end, even higher end Sony cameras are. And that means you don't need to think about what ND filter do I need, because it just sorts it out. So that's why I think so. The reason I mention this now, this sounds a bit esoteric, because my camera's not going to have this. A lot of the way this happens is that camera manufacturers will bring in these sort of abilities of the cameras at the high end, and they say, well, that works really, really well. Why don't we include that in the mirrorless cameras?
Some of that tech comes along for the more advanced models, they'll filter the existing technology downward.
So, I mean, it even annoys me that I've got the Sony A9 III, which alongside the A1 Mark II is probably regarded as the top end mirrorless cameras. But it doesn't have this variable auto ND, whereas the FX9 does. And it's so useful.
But it's a dedicated Cinecam.
Yeah, but, what I would hope is that it's now proven technology, and they would just say, well, we'll just, include that in mirrorless cameras now, so that, everybody going on Safari will just have that in their camera, their mirrorless camera now. Because I don't see why not, A lot of these things, a lot of these technologies started on very high-end cameras, and they thought, well, that's so useful. Why don't we just include it on all of them? So that is my hope anyway. I'll just conclude that by saying that the technology that the Sony's cameras and the new Fujifilm camera uses is liquid crystal. So it,
Right.
like on a calculator, it's the liquid. It uses that technology of like putting a certain amount of darkness in front of the sensor. It's right at that sort of level. That's how it actually changes variably.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I'm not aware that Canon, Arri, Red, Blackmagic, Panasonic, any of the others do that.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Right, book review. Go on. Off you go.
So, book review time. 101 Curious Tales of East African Birds. And if I just dislocate your shoulder to the left here, and bring it forward, and we can have a look.
Definitely not 101 uses for a dead cat.
No, 101 Curious Tales of East African Birds. It's a book written by a guy called Colin Beale, who's a professor in University of York's biology department, and it's published by Pelagic Publishing. So I saw this book in one of the bookshops in the airport bookshops. But as often is the case, it's really overpriced. So I waited until I returned to the UK instead, and I managed to pick up the book. But I must say, I sort of felt a bit of an immediate bond to the author, Professor Colin Beale, because I read in the first paragraph of the introduction that the book is basically what he would talk about if we sat down and had a cold beer. So yeah, okay, I get that vibe. But also on the back, he says that he's at his happiest with a cold beer in one hand and a pair of binoculars in the other. So I think it's safe to say he's absolutely welcome on one of our photography safaris in the Mara or wherever we are. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. He's welcome on the podcast as well. So
absolutely.
Must meet this man. He's
sounds
right up our street.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
So, yeah, how are you, Colin? Come to the Mara with me.
Yeah.
Anyway, the book is pretty much 101 very easily digestible, short, concise essays on a range of species that we'd see in East Africa. It's not a field guide. It's really important to say that. It's not a species ID guide. And the world doesn't need another ID guide. There are so many of them. What it actually is an account of some of the incredible ecological adaptations and strategies that are reflected in species behaviour. So, if you know me, I'm a bit of a nerd. It's absolutely right up my street. It reveals great details about functions of, these are just examples, the functions of an African spoonbill's bill, bee eaters and their natural immunity to insect venom, how lappet-faced vultures will use acute hearing as well as their incredible eyesight, meaning they can hear a distress call way before they actually spot a carcass. Basically, it's in the best possible way, it's top nerd, which is it's why I really enjoy just picking up this book and learning more, bit by bit. It's every day is a school day kind of book. Each species account is accompanied by a very decent photograph. It's not a photography book, so I'm not going to start critiquing that kind of element of it. To suffice to say that the artwork is certainly very complementary to sort of wonderful written content. I always think a book can be judged by how often we pick it up off the bookshelf and refer to it. And for me, this goes between my bookshelf and my desk as many times as a lot of my other favourite behavioural wildlife guides. So in short, highly recommended. In fact, our wildlife wonder for this episode is 100% influenced by this incredible book.
I'll have to give it a read. Will you just leave it here?
No. It's brilliant. So I did say I would use this super book as a part of our wildlife wonder for this episode, which is going to be about secretary birds. Now, secretary birds are absolutely one of Africa's most distinctive hunters. Often seen striding through open grasslands, occasionally resting in trees. Most people would say their uniqueness is in their crest of feathers. That's a crest of feathers, by the way. Which are almost quill-like in appearance. And this is supposedly where the name originates, a secretary bird with feathers resembling quill pens.
Because I always use a quill pen when I'm writing my secretarial notes.
So I say supposedly because it's a nice story, but I think there's a more realistic theory that is perhaps a misheard corruption by European naturalists, similar to how about white rhino, wide mouth became white rhino, that sort of theory, which is also the subject of debate. And we'll
yes, I'm not actually sure if that's true or not now. Yeah. I always thought it was true, but less so now.
Some very interesting information that I've just read about that might just be a load of horse shit as well.
Well, we'll check that and come back to it.
Yeah. Anyway, it's another story. So rather than quill-like feathers, this other theory, which I think holds a lot more water, is that secretary bird may be a poor translation of sacrete, which is French. Pronunciation
Lovely
might be utter crap, to be fair. But it's French Arabic, which translates as hunter bird.
Sacré sounds like sacred ground, but then if it's Arabic,
it's French Arabic.
That would be different. Yeah. Well, French,
which makes more sense for like the territory.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So a lot of the Middle East had French as a second language, which I discovered when I went to Lebanon.
Yeah.
They spoke more French as a second language than English, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So that whole secretary bird is more, I think it's more likely to be a corruption of that rather than this quill-like feathers going on. But anyway, the wildlife wonder is not about the name, but it's more about their remarkable hunting style. So, like birds generally swoop from above, Their nearest relatives are eagles, but it's not an eagle, it's a secretary bird. So instead of swooping from above, it stalks on foot, using its powerful legs to deliver incredibly rapid, forceful kicks which subdue and kill prey, especially snakes. Now, in his book, this fantastic book that we're talking about, Professor Colin Beale gives a fantastic analogy about just how strong a kick from a secretary bird is. He writes that a professional soccer player, I'm going to be international, soccer, professional soccer player, somebody can kick a football with a force that is equivalent to about twice of their body mass. Now, a secretary bird can achieve about 5 times that power. So, Newcastle United's Big Dan Burn, let's be sort of parochial,
4 meters tall.
Yeah. So if our Dan Burn from Blythe can hoof a ball 80 meters, right? A human-sized secretary bird may be able to manage about 400 to 500 meters. Yeah,
imagine that. There's the next signing for the
So if the secretary bird was the same size as Dan Burn, that secretary bird has the power in that leg to kick that ball over 400 or 500 meters, and that's a canny kick, isn't it?
That's way out of a Gallagher then.
It is way out. Immense amount of power from a bird. Absolutely epic. So that's the wildlife wonder, the absolute strength of a secretary bird's kick, and an amazing analogy to Big Dan Burn from Blythe.
Absolutely. Well done.
We're not Geordies,
desperate Dan.
I'm not a Geordie, am I?
So I think 2025's safari was the best opportunity I've had with the secretary bird.
Right.
I don't know if you were there for the time that we were tracking them, but you were a bit further behind in your vehicle. Just I know we've referred to this before about us being in different vehicles. We obviously try and be in different vehicles so we can cover talking
different
to clients,
areas, different times, different locations.
We're not always together at the same time. Anyway, so we tracked this one for quite a while, and the only problem with secretary birds is they just never stay still. They're always on the move. It's like a constant. It's like the hunting. They go at quite a pace, actually.
Like the southern ground hornbills, remember them?
Yes, they're always moving, moving. Yeah, and obviously they're moving through, well, not obviously, but they're often moving through grasses, quite tall grasses, which is where their prey is, like small snakes, big insects, I don't know, locusts or something, but snakes and stuff like that. They're stalking through these grasses, so it'd be quite tricky to actually keep their the head in focus, because it's moving all the time, and it's amongst grasses, and it can get confused, and you have to try and think about what the best focus mode is for getting that, and will your camera track it rather than locking onto the grasses and all this sort of thing. Very rewarding, really rewarding, because I think that is the best secretary bird photographs I've got of
Right.
all of the trips we've done.
Yeah, we do have various photographs from various secretary bird encounters that we've enjoyed, but yeah, definitely get what you're saying. They are difficult to photograph.
Yeah.
They often just stroll away in the opposite direction. You just turn around and all you get is a secretary bird arse walking away from you. You know.
Yeah. Actually, just on that, I think in terms of the ethics, you can always tell that the wildlife guides are positioning the vehicles so that there would be no stress to the birds.
Absolutely.
This is the same with all the wildlife. So you might think, can you just put the vehicle here so that it comes directly towards me? That's good for a photographer.
Yeah,
but it's not good for the bird.
Yeah.
So you can always tell the good guides will position the vehicle so that the bird never feels like they've got nowhere to go. They go past you. So
they're constantly trying to make us balance between, Moses and James. They understand the light.
Yeah.
They understand they understand our requirements, but ultimately is the requirements of the animal.
Yeah.
And it's just trying to sort of make a good balance between all of those things. And sometimes it works for us, other times it doesn't. But we have to accept that when it doesn't, it's just the way it is. You know?
I think this ties into what we were talking about in the last episode about the big five.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, I'm here to do what I want to do, regardless of what the wildlife's going to do.
No.
You're there to sort of mingle with the wildlife, but not disturb it.
Absolutely.
To get the best possible shots, but not affect negatively what the wildlife itself is doing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's key.
So on that ethical note, that's probably enough for episode 17 of the African Photography Safaris podcast. If you'd like to check out the Wild Insights blog on our website, please do. Have a look at our photo safaris too. Go to africanphotographysafaris.com and we're booking now. So come along, have an epic experience. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you around the campfire.
Cheers.
Ta-ta. Cheers. Bye.